Hi, my name is John Flett. I'm a pediatrician at Busamed Private Hospital. I'm going to talk to you about something that you've probably been hearing about from family, friends, or at least heard from other parents from the school that you go to, that all these kids are getting a serious infection called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. You might have had your child had a nose infection that is not just a typical cold, that spread and caused lots of chestiness. I've got to say that we've been seeing an enormous number of children this year that have been coming into the practice with not just typical colds. It's almost as though you can hear the same child 35 times with the same cough. Just that sound of that cough, that deep, chesty, wet, productive cough. It can start off with high fevers, make a child very unwell, and we've been admitting children to hospital in a way that we haven't for at least a couple of years. So I'm going to tell you about the RSV virus and what you should be looking at as parents and how we should be preparing over the next couple of months. First of all, RSV is a virus that tends to be seasonal. It's a virus that comes around in KZN, in the coastal areas, round about February, March, and April. It starts to calm down in about May. And elsewhere in the country, it tends to be more of a virus during winter. And it's a disease that generally tends to influence and make younger kids sick, under the age of 2. But because of COVID and what we call the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the sanitizing, the masks, isolation, young children have been kept away from creches and preschools. A lot of parents have been worried not sending their children to school. And now that COVID has calmed down, because COVID really hasn't affected children. COVID has been almost a non-event for kids. And yet it affected adults and older adults. Now, RSV is the reverse. It is an infection that tends to influence children, but not so much adults. Because you and I as adults, we've been exposed as young kids. So, it is most likely the COVID restrictions that have caused this rebound, because children haven't got that infection when they were younger, under the age of 2. Now they're getting hit and being made sick as older kids. So we're seeing a shift in the age group of children with RSV. And the latest modeling studies predicts a severe 2022 RSV season in SA. And a lot of the experts are saying that hospitals must be prepared. What is RSV virus? It's a common cold and other respiratory symptoms that you commonly get, and it's mainly under the age of 2. Most commonly in winter, but in early spring. And of course in KZN, we're seeing it now. That is more kind of in that sort of late summer, early autumn, and mainly in children under the age of 4 years. So it can cause fever, sore throat, irritability, tired, kids coming in there just absolutely not themselves. It can cause so much mucus in young babies. Remember, a young baby can't breathe through their mouths until they're 3 months old. So if a young baby gets a blocked up nose, they can't breathe. They stop breathing. They can get apnea, become cyanotic, blue. So it can cause a major problem in young babies. Now, the one thing about respiratory problems, these include causing a tightness, a wheeziness in a child that doesn't necessarily have asthma. It causes such like mucus plugging, like mozzarella, industrial proportions like Victoria Falls with mozzarella at the back of the throat, sinuses, chestiness. It can cause pneumonia, and my goodness, we've been admitting children left, right, and center with these problems. And of course, if you have an underlying problem like asthma or a weak immune system, then, or a heart problem, kind of like what we would say in adults, a pre-existing condition, a comorbidity, it's going to affect your child worse. So kids with weak immune systems that are premature, who have other chronic lung problems, are mostly affected. What is the incubation period and contagious periods? This is something that I think is quite important to understand. The incubation period is about 1 week, and the most common is about sort of 4 to 6 days. And you're contagious with this virus for about 1 week to 8 days afterwards. But young kids can spread it for 1 month. And usually, we would say from the beginning of the day or so before the signs of the symptoms start to about a week after. But young children can really spread it. How's it spread? Exactly like COVID. A droplet, mucus, and of course kids, there's close contact with each other. Thank goodness kids didn't get COVID. But RSV is so infectious. It is more infectious than COVID. But of course, it doesn't affect adults as much. Contact with this, the mucus that's spread by sneezing, coughing, it can survive on your hands anywhere for about half an hour. So, before signs and symptoms appear, the person that starts to shed the virus infects other people. How do you control it? Exactly like COVID. Sanitizers, washing hands. That's the most important thing. Exactly the way you would treat and kind of avoid COVID, that's exactly the way you avoid the RSV virus. So how do we sort of kind of think about how should teachers, families, caregivers in creches, how should they be kind of reacting? First of all, report the infection and let all those other parents know. And I mean, there are kids at school and classes and kids there must be sort of half, 3/4 of the kids away from school at the moment. And, it's not necessarily the fault of the creches. Unfortunately, children spread these problems. And of course, come back home and they spread it to their parents. I've seen a lot of adults that have also been affected. People that are over 65, their weak immune systems, they're also affected. So remember, grandparents are very much at risk. COVID lockdown restrictions, such as physical distancing, masks, suppressed the ability of the respiratory syncytial virus to spread. And of course, normal kids in creches would have picked those up early, under the age of 2, but there's a shift towards older children. So we're also seeing lots of older children this year. And I'm going to post in my Facebook group and page just a study that is being done at the moment and modeling of how much worse it's going to be this year. It's predicted, and I would say that's very much what I'm seeing in my practice, at least a 32% increase in the number of cases. And we are having to, admit children for physiotherapy, nebulization, suctioning. The treatment for this is very much like COVID. You can't treat it with an antibiotic, but it can cause secondary infections. It can cause your immune system to be weakened, and of course you get secondary infections. So I've had questions by parents and saying, look, I'm on an antibiotic. I should be fine. No, you can still spread it. You've got to think for at least 10 days after your symptoms, you are infectious. An antibiotic stops secondary infections. It doesn't stop mucus. Unfortunately, there's this misperception that an antibiotic is like a cough syrup. It's going to stop mucus. It's going to stop you infecting someone. No, it's not. You can't stop COVID by taking an antibiotic. You can't stop your infection of other people. So, one's got to be very much, I think, considerate to other parents. If your child is sick, keep them at home. Make sure that if they are having serious symptoms, that you seek medical help very quick and early. Because, what I'm seeing is parents may be delaying things. If your child has a high fever, unwell, battling to breathe, wheezy, mucousy, not eating, drinking, that's not a good sign. Sometimes we're having to admit young children. So lots of fluid, bring down the temperature, make sure that you use simple things like spraying the nose, younger children with nasal aspirators, they're upright, don't get them to sleep lying flat. Make sure that you get adequate medical help early. So I hope that helps you understand that this year the common colds are going to be a lot worse. So, if your child has got high fevers, they're breathing fast. There's this little muscle above the sternal notch here where it sort of kind of sucks in like this. That's a sign of respiratory distress. Little parts of the nose go up and down. You can see your child's breathing fast. Little areas in between the ribs called intercostal recession, sucking under the sternum. Those are signs of respiratory distress. It means that your child is battling to breathe. And that is something that you need to, if your child is having those symptoms, you need to seek medical help.